This evening, I'm going to be discussing an autobiography based solely on various books that I've read. I'd like to start off with a series titled The Hardy Boys. Why they were so influential in my life is because they were one of the first books that I actually read by myself without being told to do so. So it wasn't like a school book where I had to read it. It was for pleasure, and I they they're very catching. That's what made them so good. It was for the age, for the time that I read them. They were very they're very intriguing. They provided a good story, and at the same time they provided a good puzzle, something that kept my mind going to solve. Wasn't a just a book that told a sole story, but it was a book that told a story and a puzzle all at once. I read these books when I was about 10 years old when I started reading them, um, and I continued reading them until I'd say for the better part of a year. Got through a fair fair number of the books in the series before intellectually I outgrew them. But in all honesty, I can't give a specific passage from which these books actually influenced my life because they just the books as a whole, the whole package that they provided is what helped me grow. After that, my the next choice would be Harry Potter. These books I actually started reading when I was 8 years old. Um, they started off being a family book. We'd sit down and read it together. And as I grew, I started to read them on my own. And they were the first um, truly fantasy-based books that I read, and they opened me up to a whole new genre that really impacted what I'd like, what books I'd choose in the future, what different aspects I'd look in uh, the different aspects I'd look in games, um, video games, board games, just card games, different stuff that I do with friends at a young age, and then later on in life, I just didn't read the books for intellectual growth. I read them more for intellectual pleasure as I grew older, and the books came out one at a time, and they continued the feeling, the experience I felt as a young kid. The next book I'd like to discuss, or the series as well, is a series titled Bartimaeus. It's the series in general is another fantastical world based on the modern world where a child has powers to summon demons, and demons are in the same sense as genies or something along those lines. So the kid was more of or the young adult was more of a wizard, you could say. And in order to display his powers, they'd conjure genies and bind them in a certain ritual. And this bond was more for the purpose of the master than the genie, who would always find a different way to try to break the bond. But in the end, the two came about as close to friends as you can get in a master and slave relationship, um, and ended up fighting different mystical beings. But this book was following the Harry Potter series, or the beginning of the Harry Potter series was the first larger text that I read. It was one of the first books that contained a larger plot, a larger story than the books I had been reading up to that point. Um, I started reading these around the end of fifth, beginning of sixth grade, and they, along with the Harry Potter books, they really shaped my mind towards fantasies, towards different books, different um, aspects, to be more of the focus on the fantastical world. Um, Following the completion of the first two books in the Bartimaeus series, I decided to read a book called The Duel of Eagles. And I'd always been interested in World War II, and this book was purely about the Battle of Britain and the different ways the British Air Force and the German Luftwaffe grew up to the point of the Battle of Britain and how it affected the two countries as a whole. And same as all the other books, there's no exact passage that truly made this book a part of my development, other than the fact that it was the first um, nonfiction book of actual caliber that I read, compared to smaller books that contain lots of photos and different documents, so to say. Um, but this book was a large text that really required a lot of looking up words, a lot of rereading to understand the complex ideas that it had in it. And I started and finished this book um, in the matter of 7 months in my sixth grade, and it really opened up my eyes to the world of nonfiction. And for a good while there, I focused solely on nonfiction books, and that sort of went away from my trend of books that focused on the fantastical world. And it took me the better part of 3 years to go back to nonfiction and to get back into those stories. Um, at that point, I decided to start reading a book that was gifted to me, titled Aragon, the first book in the Inheritance Cycle. This book was the book that brought me back into the world of fantasy, and it was the book that got me interested in the stories like Lord of the Rings and um, epic adventures like that. And what made this book so appealing was that it was a cross between Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, and the fact that it provided this grand adventure, just like Lord of the Rings, but it also provided the sense of magic, the thrill of different species, different characters, just a grand expansion on the fantasies that I read earlier on. Um, this book allowed me to focus more on a level which required the connection between multiple characters and concepts in a nonfiction book, or in a fictional book that I was used to in a nonfiction book, but at the same time, it it was displayed in such a different manner that it developed my sense to differentiate between different stories and different different meanings of different characters and how they're portrayed. After reading that book, I got interested in the world of Lord of the Rings, and I decided to start off that series with reading The Hobbit. And more than the Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, The Hobbit actually influenced my growth more, just because it was the first book, and it also and it continued to develop my ability to follow multiple characters, to follow the the complexity drawn between the relationship between multiple characters, and it allowed me to just continue to grow my interest in fantasy and help concrete the effect that fantasy was having in other parts of my life, going back to different parts of entertainment and like what I prefer to watch, what I prefer to read, what I prefer to play, what I preferred to discuss with friends. It all was based, or it all had a basis in fantastical pieces of work. Um, Following The Hobbit, I decided to go back and read a nonfiction book, because I hadn't done so in a while, and I was itching for some actual facts, some actual event that happened, and I picked up a book in the store that, in all honesty, the cover looked intriguing, and I decided to read it, and it turned out to be a book that was later turned into a movie titled Flyboys, and um, the movie was more of a TV series type film. It was more of a documentary type film, but nonetheless, it was based off the events that happened in the book and happened to real people. And what made this book so intriguing was that it it uh, it provided a look into the different struggles that people actually had um, in making decisions and deciding what was best for themselves, their their people, their um, their well-being on moral and ethical standpoints, as well as religious standpoints, and it it opened my eyes to different controversies and different controversial events that occurred during World War II, specifically during the Pacific Campaign. But um, this book, if I had to choose a part of this book that influenced me the most, would be the part where, within a Japanese held island, um, a a group of airmen were executed for a morale purpose of the for the garrison there, but also at the same time they were executed because the garrison was surrounded by um, and bypassed by by the American fleet, causing it to be cut off from supplies, and they were needed to be killed for food, which really uh, opened my eyes to different crimes and different events that took place that would um, seem like they could never happen, but at the same time, knowing that they did happen, allowed me to realize that humans and people would go through and go um, to the extent to any extent in order to maintain in order to survive and maintain um, their sense of living. Um, You know, after that, there was a long period of time where there wasn't really a text or any piece that really influenced me until I started to read um, three series, and these series were all started within a short period of each other, and the completion of them overlapped. So, um, as one, they all focused on one main theme, and that one theme was the thing that influenced me up to this point, or had a lot of influence at me at this point. And the series were titled the Mordecai Saga, which is about a typical boy in the current living in current America who is somehow transported to a an alternative timeline, alternative uh, world which is similar to Earth, in where he can perform magic, and he is um, considered a savior for a certain group of people, and it documents the struggles between a corrupt government, a tyrannical government, and its conquest to subdue the different portions of that land, and how the settlers of that land, how they and the populace of that land fought back and ultimately won. So it's a societal struggle book broken down into different little events that occurred along the way, in, to the final victory. This book is also a book, a fantastical book, where it it follows my earlier trend, from later childhood, and just like then, it influenced um, just the different types of entertainment, the different types of um, thrills I sought out in order to um, figure out what I was going to focus on, what I was going to decide to read next. In that same spirit, I decided to read a book that was similarly about societal struggle, but in this case, it was more on a galactic level, a almost universal level, where it focuses on a society that has branched out and conquered a vast amount of space and turned into a society run by mega corporations, and how the different corporations are vying for support, if not support, conquest on various worlds that have been settled. And it ultimately focuses on a a freelance ship and its crew, and how they go about trying to save different worlds that are being focused on by these mega corporations. Um, in the same manner as the last, this series um, just opened my eyes up to different struggles. Uh, Even though they were fictional struggles, they're still based off real societal struggles up to this point. So they opened up my eyes on how different struggles are occurring throughout society now, and how people are, whether or not they're doing it in the same manner is definitely not the case, but how they're going about trying to preserve their culture, trying to preserve their way of life. At the same point, the last book, or the last series that focuses on societal struggle is called The Hunger Games, and this one is about a government that seeks control of its people through a gladiatorial type, a gladiatorial style of execution in order to maintain its presence, maintain its supremacy and dominance over city-states that formed after a nuclear apocalypse, a nuclear annihilation of different of an area, and it focuses on how the people that have been suppressed, people that have bowed down to this tyrannical government, have decided to rise up and fight back, disregarding any personal safety, disregarding punishment that can happen if they fail, in order to try to create a society, create a country that is run by the people, without the tyrannical and the mistreatment that the last regime provided. The last three books really influenced just what I want my character to be like, my personal character, how I want it to focus more on the betterment of society, betterment of people rather than a betterment of myself, and how I can go about helping people rather than how I can go about helping myself. And in all the books, in all the series and books that I've listed, that is probably the one overarching theme that is found throughout them all, and that is probably the biggest lesson, the biggest take I can get from all the different texts that have influenced me over my life.